And it looks like nobody expected it to be so huge.
Now, more than 3 million Ukrainians have become refugees, and the majority are fleeing to neighboring Poland, an EU member state. Our reporter Emmanuel Chaz has been following the situation on the border between the two countries. She met with French firefighters who were sent to help with the new arrivals.
Dozens are at the Polish border with Ukraine. French firefighters, volunteers or professionals to help with the arrival of thousands of refugees, such as here in Medica.
We're all doing our best. We take turns day and night, just like the others. We don't have any more merit. We're here to help, to give support. The flow of refugees was very irregular. We adapted ourselves to the care that's needed. Healthcare, psychological help, tending to babies, rehydrating them. There were some cases of hypothermia, and tending to people too, with comfort and a kind word.
50 kilometers away from Medica, Budomierz, another border checkpoint. Here, firefighters from France's Haute-Savoie region backing up their Polish colleagues. They welcome every refugee, in their vast majority women, children, or elderly people. Firefighters carry their luggages, comfort them a bit, and guide them towards emergency shelters or to the nearest station for those who want to travel further, like this family who has just arrived from Dnieper.
We came from Ukraine. In our hometown, our people are suffering a lot. There is a lot of destruction and a lot of fear. There is no peace. We have children. You know, we love our country very, very much. And we didn't want to leave. Now, we are very worried for the men that stayed behind.
As firefighters, we're not used to doing this kind of thing. Of course, we help people on a daily basis, but we usually don't travel to the borders of a country at war, which is the case 20 kilometers from our current position.
At the border between Ukraine and Poland, just like many other aid workers, the French firefighters try to alleviate the plight of the humanitarian crisis, which many fear could be only beginning.
Now, moving on to some other news, France's Interior Minister says that Paris is ready to discuss Corsica's autonomy. It comes after 2 weeks of protests on the island. Sunday, over 100 people were injured in riots. Protests that were triggered after the assault of Ivan Colonna in prison. He is a Corsican separatist leader serving time for the assassination of the island's prefect in 1998. Now, for more, earlier I spoke to Ariane Bouguin. She's a lecturer in French and politics at Northumbria University. I started by asking her what autonomy could mean.
It's clearly very symbolic, because I believe that no French government has ever used the word autonomy. But what do we put in it? And you could be sure that there will be a lot of differences in interpretation. Is the French government thinking of giving Corsica more competences, more areas of competences? That's not autonomy, because under the current system, and I simplify, any territory can do whatever they want within their areas of competence as long as they follow French law. So that's not autonomy. Are we talking legislative autonomy? That means the ability for Corsica to do their own laws. But then what are we talking about? All areas except the core function of the state, defense, security, and foreign affairs? Are we talking limited areas? Which one? And then if we do that for Corsica, should we not roll it out for other regions in France or territories in France that might want it? And that will bring a whole debate between Jacobinism in French, which is the idea that France is one country, one law, and those who are more in favor of more freedom for the territories. So autonomy is an important word, but my question here is, what does it actually mean?
So a lot of key issues there to hammer out. In your opinion, how big is the independence movement, though, in Corsica?
Right. So First of all, the kind of movement, the independentist movement has a long history in Corsica, and we should not forget the armed phase of it, especially from mid-75 until 2014, when violence was no longer, when they decided not to do violence anymore. However, we need to differentiate between independentist and autonomist. So the current executive in Corsica is autonomist, which means that they want autonomy, but they want to remain within the kind of, French Republic. Independentists obviously want secession. As a society, the Corsican society has a majority of nationalists, but it's more autonomist than independentist. However, with the violence that we've seen, it does give a lot of power to those who think that violence is the answer, because they've achieved in 2 weeks more than the Corsican executive has achieved in 5 years, because they have made the French government say the word autonomy. So the nationalism is big in Corsica, but not necessarily independence. Autonomy tends to have the majority.
Finally, to some positive news. 2 British Iranians are on their way home to the UK after lengthy prison stays in Iran. Nazanin ZaghariRatcliffe was jailed in 2016. She was convicted of plotting to overthrow clerics. Anousheh Ashouri was convicted of spying for Israel. You can see them there on their stopover in Oman earlier this evening. The families of both believe that they are being held hostage as a part of a political game. Berika Behal reports.
After 6 years, she's finally going home. The UK government announced Wednesday that British Iranian citizen Nazanin ZaghariRatcliffe has been released from Iranian detention and is returning to Britain, along with fellow detainee Anousheh Ashouri, after Iranian media said the UK government had repaid a $400 million debt dating back to the Shah of Iran.
Well, I suppose that we can stop being a moment in history and start being a normal family again. It's been a long time. It's been a long journey that people have been keeping us following it on the news, on petitions, with the government. I've said some rough things over the years, but in the end, she's coming home.
The 2 dual nationals had been arrested on charges of plotting to overthrow the Iranian government. In 2016, ZaghariRatcliffe was working as a project manager for the Thomson Reuters Foundation and in Tehran airport with her infant daughter when she was suddenly detained. Despite strong denials of the charges, she was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. ZaghariRatcliffe's husband has pressured the government for several years to secure his wife's release, even going on a 3-week hunger strike last year. The families of both detainees have argued the pair were being held as political prisoners, becoming bargaining chips between Iran and the UK amid heightened international tensions. But Britain has avoided linking the pre-Islamic Revolution debt to ZaghariRatcliffe's detention.
We've been working hard over the last 6 months to ensure that we were able to secure the release of these detainees. I just want to say my sympathies are with the families for what they've suffered over this appalling time.
A 3rd dual national, Morad Tabaz, has also been released, and the government says work is continuing to bring him home.
That wraps up your news update. Stay tuned to France 24.
France 24, your window on the world. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Join us every day here on France 24 for the last stretch of the presidential race, the mother of all election, the presidential election. This is the time for the French to choose their president. We'll have all our special envoys on the campaign trail across the globe, the latest analysis, the best polls. Join us here on France 24.
France 2022, the campaign on France 24 and France24.com.
Hello and thank you for tuning in to France 24. This is live from Paris. Your top stories this hour. A theatre in Mariupol is in ruins. Ukrainian authorities say hundreds of civilians were taking shelter there and accuse Russia of committing a war crime. Moscow denies the attack, but without giving any evidence. Protect our skies, the pleas of Ukrainian President Zelensky to the US Congress. He compares the situation in his country to what happened in Pearl Harbor. Joe Biden stands firmly against a no-fly zone, but promises anti-aircraft technology, drones, and extra money. And Nazanin ZaghariRatcliffe is a free woman. The aid worker is on her way back to the UK after 6 years in prison and under house arrest in Iran. She's joined by Anousheh Ashuri, another British-Iranian ex-prisoner of the Islamic Republic. Ukraine's foreign ministry says that Russian forces bombed a theatre in Mariupol. Authorities are attempting to find out the number of casualties. The drama theatre was being used as a shelter for hundreds of civilians. Now, Moscow denies the attack, blaming it on a far-right Ukrainian militia. Meanwhile, Ukraine's general prosecutor has opened an inquiry into the deaths of 10 civilians in Chernihiv. Moscow denies US claims that they were killed whilst queuing for bread. On day 21 of Russia's invasion, the Kremlin soldiers have been inching towards Kyiv, but have made little headway. Analysts suggest that the troops might be lacking supplies. Sinead McCausland has the latest.
In white chalk, the Russian word for children was written on the ground in front of this drama theatre in Mariupol, where around 1,000 civilians were taking refuge. Now the building is destroyed, bombed by Russian forces. The number of casualties is not yet known, according to the city's deputy mayor. Ukraine's foreign minister said Russia must have been aware they targeted a civilian shelter. It's the latest in a series of Russian attacks on civilian buildings and civilians themselves. In Chernihiv, troops shot down 10 residents queuing for bread, confirmed by Ukraine's prosecutor general. The US embassy in Kyiv said it was a horrific attack. In the capital, rescue operations were underway after Russian forces hit 2 buildings. One was a 12-story apartment block. 37 people were evacuated. Russia continues its heavy shelling around Ukraine, including in the southern city, Mykolaiv.
The only option they have is to wipe the city off the map. And only then they will be able to pass. In theory, that's possible, but we will try our best not to allow it.
But the troops are making little progress, impeded by a difficult local terrain.
Now, Ukrainian authorities say that the mayor of Melitopol has been released this days after he was abducted by Russian forces. Authorities say that Ivan Fedorov was kidnapped for, quote, refusing to cooperate with the enemy. Ukrainian presidency says that he was swapped with 9 Russian soldiers. Next, in one of the deadliest attacks in western Ukraine so far, a TV tower near the city of Rivne, just 150 kilometers from the Polish border, was shelled on Monday. Our correspondent Gulliver Cragg has this report.
Sifting through the rubble under the Rivne TV mast. Some 20 bodies were found. After visiting the site, the regional governor promised to restore the signal within 2 days and praised the rescue workers.
They did all they could. The hit was at 5:22 a.m. and the first team arrived at 5:27 a.m.
Under the TV studios in the city centre, a basement used to store old equipment is now a bomb shelter. Rivne itself has not been hit, but sirens go off daily.
We've had to interrupt the news mid-bulletin 2 or 3 times because of the sirens. When we hear them when we are at work, we always go to the shelter. But after what happened on Monday, we're even more careful. We try to run down here even quicker. It's no accident that they hit the TV tower because they are always trying to remove people's access to information.
The shelter is also used by local residents, among them Oleg.
On Monday morning, the TV signal disappeared.
Once the air raid warning is lifted, he invites us to his home to show us.
Not a single channel's working. In the villages, they're really worried. Suddenly there's no news at a time when people really want to know what's going on.
In town, people can access TV via cable or the internet. Tetiana, freshly back from the bomb shelter, gets ready for her bulletin.
We followed the news from down there, and thank God nothing happened.
She says she has no plans to leave.
I feel that I'm needed here. That's one of the reasons I'm staying. But it's also because I don't want to leave my hometown.
The news, though, features an item about a local man with a fleet of minibuses that he's been using to drive people to Poland, a destination that's on everyone's mind. So far, attacks on western Ukraine have targeted only critical infrastructure and military bases. But everyone here is wondering whether it will stay that way.
The ICC's chief prosecutor Karim Khan traveled to Ukraine today, meeting with the country's foreign minister and prosecutor general. The Hague-based court has launched a formal investigation into possible war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. Now, neither Ukraine nor Russia are members of the International Criminal Court. Analysts say that it's unlikely to see Vladimir Putin appear before a court in the near future, but that an inquiry can help shed light on what's been happening on the ground. The US president has described his Russian counterpart as a war criminal. This on the day Joe Biden announced $800 million in extra aid to Ukraine to fight back against Vladimir Putin's invasion. The Kremlin has reacted, saying that Biden's words were unacceptable and unforgivable. Take a listen for yourselves. Oh, I think he is a war criminal. Now, Joe Biden was speaking there after his Ukrainian counterpart gave an impassioned speech to the US Congress on Wednesday, asking for more help to protect Ukrainian skies. For more on this, I'm joined by The Guardian's Washington bureau chief David Smith. David, Joe Biden says that he thinks Putin is a war criminal. This before a court finds him guilty of such. Was this a slip of the tongue?
Yes, I think it was of sorts. Joe Biden has a long history of this, going back to his days as a senator and a presidential candidate. And it's one of the reasons why his public relations handlers often try and keep him away from journalists. So earlier in the day, we saw Joe Biden give a speech where he certainly laid out Vladimir Putin's atrocities and made clear the steadfast support of the US people for Ukraine, and made clear that he's appalled by what's going on in Russia, but he did not use the phrase war criminal. And then as an unrelated event, it was that interaction with journalists where he just couldn't help himself and the words spilled out. Now, many will certainly agree with him and will be glad that he's taking this tough stand, as many senators are urging him to do. But this probably was unprepared, because there's a legal process underway at the State Department. As you mentioned, there's the International Criminal Court. It's probably not quite the way the White House wanted to present it. Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, was questioned about it, and she said Joe Biden was speaking from the heart based on what has been watching on TV, that his words speak for themselves. It's an approach that, that phrase, Vice President Harris, others have been tiptoeing around it, but today Joe Biden actually went there.
And David, a no-fly zone is still out of the question, but the US has pledged military equipment and more money. How much has Washington promised so far?
Well, that's right. Today, we got another $800 million in security assistance pledged to Ukraine. That's for everything from anti-aircraft weapons to drones to many rifles and pistols and body armor and helmets and so on. And this now takes the total up to more than $2 billion since Joe Biden took office in January 2021. A very determined response, certainly the White House would argue, to prepare for this resistance effort by the Ukrainians against the Russian war machine. They would argue it's actually been pretty successful so far. If you look at Russian casualties and the lack of progress by the Russian military, really underperforming what many people expected. But it is, of course, in lieu of other measures such as a no-fly zone. And we heard Ukrainian President Zelensky make a plea again for a no-fly zone today and for other forms of support to the US Congress. That was a powerful, emotional moment. Some senators had tears in their eyes. Some of them came out fired up, saying that America really does have to do more and flex its muscles as a superpower. So I think Joe Biden's going to continue to face pressure to keep giving money, to keep taking other steps to assist the Ukrainians.
All right, The Guardian's David Smith reporting for us there. Now, despite President Zelensky's pleas, the NATO leaders stand by their choice to not trigger a no-fly zone. Blocking Russian planes with NATO planes amounts to engaging in direct military conflict with Moscow, something the transatlantic alliance says it's not prepared to do. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says member states are united on this issue. Earlier, we spoke to our Brussels correspondent Dave Keating. He has this.
Stoltenberg, in his press conference after that meeting of defense ministers, was very keen to talk about what NATO is doing rather than what it isn't doing. But he did say that the defense ministers are united on this question, that there should be no NATO forces on the ground or NATO planes in the sky, because it would escalate the situation. However, he said that the NATO allies would continue providing arms and military assistance to Ukraine, and that they were in this for the long haul. And that was an effort that we saw echoed by President Biden in his speech after Zelensky's address to Parliament, to the US Congress, rather. So I think we're seeing, Zelensky did bring up this request to close the skies in the address to Congress, but he moved on from it pretty quick. I think that the emphasis now is turning toward providing aircraft. This has been the other thing that Ukraine has been asking for, which has not yet been provided. We did have these MiG planes from Poland that were supposed to be sent over and never were, possibly because it was advertised too much and they were going to become too much of a target. But this is a big focus for the defense ministers, I'm told today, that we're talking about how and if those aircraft or another type of aircraft could be sent over to Ukraine. The difficulty is that aircraft have to be flown over. And so once they're in the sky, they become a target. And the risk is that if they are shot out of the sky within NATO territory, that could spark an incident that leads to World War III. If they are shot down with a NATO pilot inside, that's also problematic. And just bringing them over on a truck, let's say on land over the border, isn't as simple as it sounds when I've talked to military experts. However, they did talk about ways they can do that today. But I think the main message from these defense ministers is that they are in this for the long haul, and they will continue arming Ukraine as long as it takes.
Next to a legal verdict on the war. The UN's top court has ordered Moscow to stop its military operation in Ukraine. Kyiv had dragged Moscow before the International Court of Justice late February, just after the invasion. The ruling is binding, but the court has no means of enforcement. Nevertheless, Kyiv has hailed the verdict as a complete victory, President Zelensky tweeting that the order will isolate Russia even further. Now, the Russian president says that his military operation is going to plan. But despite devastating bombings, the loss of life, the destruction of homes and livelihoods, on day 21 of the Russian invasion, Ukrainian soldiers and civilians are resisting, and Vladimir Putin's forces appear to be struggling. Several reports suggest that Russia's secret service, the FSB, has come under scrutiny for the lack of progress in this war. Now, earlier I spoke to Andrei Soldatov. He's a Russian intelligence expert and investigative journalist. I asked him if there was an internal purge going on within the FSB.
These two senior officials of the FSB, they are not just some generals, but they represent the foreign intelligence branch of the FSB. And it looks like something is really wrong with the intelligence in this war. I remind you that Vladimir Putin started this war publicly humiliating the chief of the Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, at the meeting of the Security Council. And now we are getting this news about the FSB Foreign Intelligence Branch being purged by the authorities.
Now, Vladimir Putin is, of course, himself the former head of the secret service that was the KGB back then. You would think that he has close relations with the FSB. What happened? Why is he not getting good intelligence?
I think the problem here is that Vladimir Putin has his own strong opinion about what is going on in Ukraine. And now it's really challenging, and maybe it's actually started some years ago, to give him something he doesn't want to hear. And because he is absolutely certain that Ukraine is dysfunctional and it's a failed state and there would be no resistance, probably people in the FSB, they just thought that it's better just to feed him what he expects actually to hear.
Now, are there people who are loyal to Vladimir Putin who might flip? I mean, should the Russian president be worried about something like this happening?
Well, I do not think that right now there is a problem of loyalty. People are too afraid, even in the FSB. For the last 7 years, we live in a climate of selective repressions, and every strata of Russian society, including the elite and including the security services, were hit with arrests, and we have people even from the FSB already in jail. And in this situation, people in the security services, they are not in position actually to challenge the authorities or to think of doing something against Vladimir Putin.
Now, the group Anonymous, they've said that they have managed to hack into FSB servers, and Russia is no newcomer to cyber warfare, but is it prepared to face so many adversaries at once? Because, of course, the Ukrainian war has galvanized most of the Western world, as well as people like groups such as Anonymous.
Yeah, it's a good question. We see that Russia built a system of the sovereign internet, and the idea of this system was to protect the country, specifically its government institutions, against attacks, I mean cyber attacks. That is not what is going on right now. DDoS attacks hit Russian government institutions really hard. We see many Russian official websites being defaced, some of them taken down completely. Still, there are problems in the zone of .ru. So it's a big, big problem, and it looks like nobody expected it to be so huge.
Now, more than 3 million Ukrainians have become refugees, and the majority are fleeing to neighboring Poland, an EU member state. Our reporter Emmanuel Chaz has been following the situation on the border between the two countries. She met with French firefighters who were sent to help with the new arrivals.
Dozens are at the Polish border with Ukraine. French firefighters, volunteers or professionals to help with the arrival of thousands of refugees, such as here in Medica.
We're all doing our best. We take turns day and night, just like the others. We don't have any more merit. We're here to help, to give support. The flow of refugees was very irregular. We adapted ourselves to the care that's needed. Healthcare, psychological help, tending to babies, rehydrating them. There were some cases of hypothermia, and tending to people too, with comfort and a kind word.
50 kilometers away from Medica, another border checkpoint. Here, firefighters from France's Haute-Savoie region backing up their Polish colleagues. They welcome every refugee, in their vast majority women, children, or elderly people. Firefighters carry their luggages, comfort them a bit, and guide them towards emergency shelters or to the nearest station for those who want to travel further, like this family who has just arrived from Dnieper.
We came from Ukraine. In our hometown, our people are suffering a lot. There is a lot of destruction and a lot of fear. There is no peace. We have children. You know, we love our country very, very much. And we didn't want to leave. Now, we are very worried for the men that stayed behind.
As firefighters, we're not used to doing this kind of thing. Of course, we help people on a daily basis, but we usually don't travel to the borders of a country at war, which is the case 20 kilometers from our current position.
At the border between Ukraine and Poland, just like many other aid workers, the French firefighters try to alleviate the plight of the humanitarian crisis, which many fear could be only beginning.
Now, moving on to some other news, France's Interior Minister says that Paris is ready to discuss